Netflix, you only had one job. Just one. How could you fuck this up?
Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller.
Netflix is doing an adaptation of one of Neil Gaiman's most popular DC Vertigo comics, The Sandman. And this would be a major event in this era of superhero movies and TV shows because we're finally getting an adaptation of one of the most critically acclaimed comics from the 1980s. Unfortunately, your Netflix has practically fumbled the football on what could have been a server crashing event because they decided to go out here and inject identity politics into their version of the Sandman. And this is going to be one of the biggest mistakes Netflix has made because here was an opportunity for them to make lots of money after the complete disaster known as Cuties was released on their platform. Now, your Netflix has practically dropped the ball with the Sandman when you take a look at the advertising. Now, in the ad for Netflix's The Sandman, as related to casting all of the roles, instead of just putting up the names of the actors, they decided to go out here and put pronouns in front of each of the actors' names. Now, this is a major mistake because many comic fans are going to get turned off by seeing these pronouns put in front of these actors' names because this is just another sign for them, Netflix, to go out here and virtue signal and promote identity politics over the great story that Neil Gaiman has presented that has passed on from generation to generation. The focus should be on these characters and making sure that they remain true to what Neil Gaiman wrote and remain true to the source material of the story and the art. That should be the main focus as related to an adaptation of The Sandman, but instead of them trying to promote one of the most popular works of the late 1980s, what we have here is them going out here looking to virtue signal and push identity politics, and what that's going to do is push away a lot of comic fans who were anticipating this adaptation for over 30 years because The Sandman was one of the most popular DC Vertigo titles, and it was one of the titles that practically defined the Vertigo publishing imprint. And instead of them looking to honor that whole franchise and make it stand out, what we get is a push to try to virtue signal to audiences that don't buy comics and trying to pander to many of these identity politics groups that don't even care about the story of the Sandman. This is a very poor marketing plan, and if I was to do the marketing plan for the Sandman, I would have been pushing hard into the goth subculture, which heavily supported this book from the late 80s all the way till now, so that I could have a core customer base that would be eager to go out here and watch this show and crash the servers on Netflix the same way the servers were crashed when Luke Cage made his debut a couple of years ago, because The Sandman has a major cult following, and if you were to go out here and market this comic right in its adaptation, you could have had a server crashing event. Unfortunately, many of the people at Netflix, they are just so woke, they cannot see how they broke an opportunity to go out here and make a really big milestone as related to superhero adaptations. Now, what's even more egregious than the virtue signaling and the identity politics presented in the ad for The Sandman with the pronouns is the casting of the character of Death. Now, the character of Death was Morpheus' sister in the Sandman comics and has gone on to become one of the most popular characters from Vertigo, and even went on to become one of the most popular characters in the DC universe. Now, the Death character has always been presented as a chalk white goth girl, and the reason why she was always presented as a chalk white goth girl is because the character was inspired by a real-life goth woman, Cinnamon Sin Hadley. And Cinnamon Sin Hadley sadly passed away a couple of years ago, and when I see this black woman in the role that was inspired by Cinnamon Sin Hadley, it's kind of an affront to her memory, because this woman was the inspiration for this character, and this character has gone on to become a goth icon in and of herself. So I really don't think that it's appropriate to go out here and cast a black woman in this role in order to try to get extra virtue signaling points and try to promote your whole idea of reskinned token characters, because this in some ways dishonors the memory of this woman who inspired this character, who became an icon for generations of comic fans and generations of people who were a part of the goth subculture. I don't believe it's appropriate to go out here and cast this black woman in this role, because it's just not the place for this type of agenda and identity politics, because Cinnamon Sin Hadley's was the inspiration for this character, and again, she was a major part of the goth scene, and she's no longer with us, and I believe that's just going too far, because you're dishonoring this woman's memory, and this is just not the place for this type of politics and type of social justice type narratives. I mean, again, the Sandman means a lot to a lot of comic fans. It means a lot to a lot of people in the goth subculture, and it was a major part of a lot of people in the scene as related to them being a part of the comic book collecting community. So I really don't believe that this is an appropriate place to go out here and cast. Now, I believe Netflix thought, oh, if we cast this black woman in the role of Death, it will be something that will be seen as positive. But I don't believe that, again, it's appropriate, because what Cinnamon Sin Hadley meant to so many people. I mean, when I look at that whole thing with them casting this black woman as Death, it's them trying to say, oh yes, there were black people as part of the goth subculture, but then if you wanted to do that, just go out here and contact a creator like myself, and I'll be glad to make you a Spellbound or a Spinsterella adaptation, but don't go out here and try to go out here and virtue signal and promote identity politics at the expense of one of the most iconic goth characters, and go out here and just dishonor the memory of the woman who inspired this character. I mean, there are plenty of other ways to go out here and get diversity out here. And again, going to a black creator like myself, you don't have to go out here and do this to this character. And that was one of the things that really disgusted me as related to this adaptation of the Sandman, is that instead of them trying to go out here and stay true to these characters, they go out here and try to push this identity politics with this series, and that really takes away from what made this series a fan favorite. I mean, when it comes down to a classic comic like the Sandman, I really would like to see a faithful adaptation that stays true to the source material, stays true to who the characters were, and stays true to their stories, because this, as I see it, is another opportunity to actually further expand the audience for superhero and comic book movies, because the Sandman was a franchise that a lot of older readers bought, a lot of casual readers bought, and it's something that I believe deserves a lot better respect than it's being given, because we really don't need all of this identity politics, all of this social justice, and all of what people call woke narratives being presented to this classic comic series. Many people who bought the Sandman, they want to see this series given the respect that Zack Snyder gave Watchmen, because when you look at Watchmen, Zack Snyder basically gave us a page-by-page translation of the source material, and it basically felt like a comic book come to life on screen. And that's what I want to see with the Sandman. I want to see a page-by-page adaptation of the comic, and I want to see that comic brought to life with the utmost respect for the source material. That's what I want to see with the Sandman. But when I look at what they've presented, I'm seeing how a lot of Netflix's identity politics is being pushed, and a lot of social justice is being pushed, and that's going to take away from one of the most defining comics of the 80s. I mean, when you think of comics that defined the 1980s, it's the X-Men run from Chris Claremont and the artists he worked with, Mark Silvestri, Jim Lee, John Byrne, Paul Smith, and Dave Cockrum. That is one of the books you think of. You also think of Todd McFarlane's Hulk run. You think of Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man run. And if you're a fan of comic book writing, you think of Mark Gruenwald's Captain America run. And you also think of Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man run. And you think of Neil Gaiman's The Sandman. Those are the books you think of when you think of the 80s. And there's a couple of DC books in there that you think of, like the Flash run that started Volume 2, and the Batman run from Jim Aparo. But The Sandman is a defining 80s book, and I really would love to see this book given the respect it deserves. I mean, many people in the goth scene have been waiting for this movie for years, and they've been waiting for this series for years, and they wanted to see something that stayed faithful to the comics. And I know that some people will think, oh, a Black Death doesn't mean anything, but once you change the ethnicity of a character, you change that character's story. And if you're going to change a character's story, then go ahead and go out here and explore those concepts in a completely different story, but show respect for the creators of that original story by staying true to it. Because I wouldn't want somebody to go out here and cast a white Matilda Crowley or another character that I created who was black, like Eastine, to cast a white woman in that role, because that would change the character's content of their character, and it would change their story, because the world is different for a white person than a black person. And I believe that this is the kind of mistake that the woke people make that winds up leading to a great opportunity for expanding the superhero movie genre and TV genre to go broke. And I would hate to see a really bad version of the Sandman, because here we have an opportunity to expand the whole superhero movie genre audience to a higher level, and it's going to be messed up because people at Netflix were going on their feelings about politics instead of trying to stay true to the facts of the source material. Now, if you want to pick up my Black Goth fiction, like the Spinsterella trilogy, the books like Spellbound, Spinsterella, and the legendary Mad Matilda, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find many of them on Smashwords, Barnes & Noble, the iBookstore, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spinsterella. Discover the dark side of love in this goth and lovely romance with Spinsterella. Get Spinsterella in paperback and e-readers at your favorite online bookseller today.